Mavian, and recording is progress. And I'm the branch manager of the Mint Hill Library in Charlotte. I'm also currently the chair of the North Carolina Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. And I also lead the Freedom to Read initiative for Charlotte Mecklenburg. I've worked in libraries for over 15 years, changing from my initial career in construction management. And I never would have succeeded in that male-dominated environment without being very passionate about intellectual freedom. So I'm really happy to see you all here today. And I would like to introduce then my colleague, Allison Bryan.
Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining us about this important and timely topic. I think we all know that this is a time that we need to engage and find our strength together and support. I do work at Elon University. I'm in the Dr. Joe Watts Williams School of Education in the Curriculum Resources Center. And I do have a relationship with the main library on campus. So I have years as a school librarian, and I'm transitioning to the academic world as well. So I'm excited to engage with you all today. Just so that Anne and I can get to know you a little bit better. It's sort of hard in a virtual space, though we are doing better post-COVID at learning how to engage online. We do have a couple of questions that we would like for you to answer. And so I will initiate that poll now. Hopefully everybody sees the poll on their screen. And you can answer the 3 questions: your level of comfort with respect to dealing with a concern or challenge. Question 2, if you have personally dealt with a concern or challenge, and then what type of library you work in. So we'll give you a minute.
It's always interesting to see who is here with us today. So it looks like we have a majority of academic librarians.
Yeah, look at that. That's sometimes atypical, but welcome. Yeah. We're happy to engage with you. All right, it looks like for the most part, everybody has answered. So looking, let me see if it will show. You can see hopefully that that we do have a few folks who are very comfortable in dealing with a concern or a challenge, but most of us are sort of in the so-so area, and then most of us haven't dealt with a challenge. So one of the things that we will talk about today is the importance of making sure you're prepared if you do end up with a concern or a challenge, and how to work with within the structures that you hopefully had. And then, as Anne said, a lot of folks from the academic and public libraries, and a few from school libraries. So let's get our presentation going. All righty. So I'd like you just to take a moment and think about, I'm assuming we've all, if we're attending this conference and working in these different library spaces, if you don't already have a library degree, you have some sort of knowledge or understanding of libraries and the role that we play in our communities. And also, hopefully, you have an idea of the importance of intellectual freedom. So I'd like you just to take a moment to think to yourself about what you think intellectual freedom is and how that may even have changed over time. Whereas I think over my years as a librarian, my ideas about the importance of intellectual freedom certainly has changed over time, and it is, I continue to sort of refine the role I play in protecting my patrons' intellectual freedom. So I might give you just a minute to sort of center yourself on that.
Feel free to add your answers to the chat if you'd like.
So we know that the ALA does have for us a definition of intellectual freedom. And hopefully we all know this, the importance of giving people, our community, the public, if we're working in a academic or school library, our students and our faculty and staff, all points of an argument or a piece of information without restriction and given all sides of a question. And book challenges aren't new. When we have sort of controversial subjects, we've sort of always had people who are not happy about materials we have or resources. They're not always thrilled with the programs that we're putting on. And but what we're seeing over time, and especially right now, is that the way that the community engages with the libraries is changing. And one way that it is changing is that people really are organizing. So this has become a political matter. Controversial texts and book banning and book challenges have become more political and more driven by groups rather than individuals. So as we used to see, a family would pose a book challenge in a school library, for example, we now see groups like Moms for Liberty, and I'm sure you all have heard about Moms for Liberty, are now organizing and getting groups of people and sometimes even challenging materials on behalf of families in school systems and public libraries. Even in academic libraries, we're seeing some growth in challenges. As I said, it's becoming political. Many of you may have heard about the Youngkin versus McAuliffe election, the gubernatorial election in Virginia, where the book selection in a local school became a part of the election. And so people are talking about this, not just in a small school community, but as a group and picking sides in elections. And then also there's lots of legislating of curriculum that's happening at the state level. And PEN America tracks this for us. You can get the information on their website. But some of this legislation, we all have heard about critical race theory and how states are legislating against diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts. And some of these states are legislating public and private institutions. So when you think about libraries that have in their collection development policy the importance of supporting the curriculum, and then the curriculum is then being legislated, it makes you think about how are you going to still meet the needs of your community with respect to the intellectual freedom question. So it's a lot to wrap our minds around, and it's a lot of outside forces operating in our spaces. And this is a new trend over time. And we'll talk about the recent trends, which in some ways I think are shocking, and then in other ways I read the news, so I don't think they're shocking. But these are some things that I suppose you could say we're up against. And so one thing that we encourage you to do is to ground yourselves in our foundational documents. So the Library Bill of Rights, which we all should be embodying and living, as well as the Code of Ethics, reminds us that we need to meet the needs of all of our constituents, all of our community members, all of our patrons or customers, however you view your role in the community, and that we embody the Code of Ethics, that we take our ideas and values of intellectual freedom and we put that into place. So somebody wrote in the chat about information accessibility and without constraints or restrictions. I think that's important. And being able to research whatever you want to be able to research. So that's what we should be doing for our community. And as we talk about this, hopefully this is just a reminder, but just to make sure that we're on the same page with respect to our vocabulary. Sometimes patrons just have a concern and they just even want to ask a question, you know, why don't you have a book about this? Or I'm really upset about this particular resource that you have. And that sometimes can be resolved with just a small conversation. I think it's important to remember that we're all sounding alarms about challenges and bannings and bans and things like that. But sometimes a conversation can actually allay some fears. Once it becomes a formal challenge, hopefully each of your libraries has a particular policy, process, and procedure about how to deal with a formal challenge. That is an official, I suppose you could say, attempt to remove or restrict the materials that are found in your library. And then, of course, a ban is the removal of the challenged material from a library or a school or a classroom or somewhere else. So Anna will go into a little bit more depth about these trends that we're seeing, I mentioned earlier.
All right, so here is we're showing just a graph of the national trends for the last 10 years. And for many years, the challenges, and again, these are formal challenges that are reported to the American Library Association. They pretty much stayed steady for about 10 years, around that 300 mark, going up and down. Of course, we had a decline in 2020. I think a lot of libraries were closed, so that probably saved us from all of that. But then in 2021, it jumped to 729. And this year in 2022, they're reporting 1,269 challenges. This is another 39% increase over what we had before. So the next slide. The interesting thing we have to think about is that when we say that there's 1,279 challenges, that actually involves 2,571 different titles. One of the things that, as Allison mentioned, is that these challenges right now, they're coming from different groups and people, and they're not just challenging one book. It's not one parent who has a concern about one book anymore. The challenges today involve multiple books. Grandparent in Catawba County challenged 25 books. In Pender County, a school board, a board member challenged 41 books. Of course, Texas wins the day with their challenge of 800 books at one time. So these are, and most of the common themes for these challenges are because the books are sexually explicit, they have LGBT content, critical race theory, the word pornography is being said over and over again. So that's pretty interesting. Okay, yeah, go ahead, next slide. The Office of Intellectual Freedom for ALA reports that out of all the challenges that they did receive, 82% are books. But other things get challenged. And a lot of you people probably realize or have had concerns over the years about maybe your book displays or programs. Right now, it's getting the Pride programming is getting a lot of attention and a lot of challenges. In North Carolina, we are showing that there was 27 attempts totaling 162 titles here in North Carolina. But what's interesting is when we talk about this 1,200, so challenges, is that the ALA also estimates that 90% of challenges go unreported. So if that's the case, the reality in the United States is probably over 12,000 challenges throughout the day. Because a lot of people don't, just don't fill out the paperwork and report back to ALA. So just imagining that is really something. Next one. Challenges come in all the different kinds of libraries. This year, or in 2022, 48% were in public libraries. That's a huge increase from last year. Last year, 37%. So, if you have 51% that are school libraries and schools. So that's not quite as surprising because the audience of the schools and school libraries are children. It makes sense that you're going to see more challenges where, concerned parents are challenging things at the school level. So I was quite surprised that there was such a jump for public libraries this year to go to 48%. And higher education is still getting some. Higher education really needs to keep their eye open on this because so many, especially community colleges, do have high school level students attending their facilities. And they have like a lot of these combo programs. I'm sure Allison could speak better to that than I can. But I wouldn't be surprised if we start seeing more challenges happening in the academic side of things. But who's making all these challenges? One would assume again that it would be a parent who's concerned over what their children are going to be reading. But really only 30% this year were parents, which is a decrease from other years. 28% are just library patrons. But the biggest jump this year was political and religious groups, 17%. Last year, it was at 10%. So this is a huge jump but I really wasn't surprised because we're hearing it more and more coming in the news about these political groups. But you also have elected officials. There's a small percentage, 3%, but especially we've seen a lot in Texas and Florida where the elected officials are actually challenging material. And some board and administration. In Pender County, I believe that was a board member who put the challenge in there. So it's not always just about a parent concerned about what they're reading. We have a lot of people who are trying to dictate what other people should have access to. Next. ALA always puts out the 10 most popular or most challenged books of the year, most popular. But this year it was top 13 because there was a lot of ties. Genderqueer is once again the top book that's challenged. This is an adult nonfiction biography, graphic novel. So, but it has been challenged a number of years. Many challenges are for young adults. This year, there was 9 of these books are in the young adult genre for adults and nonfiction. Graphic novels tend to get challenged quite a bit as well. And they have this special distinction because they have pictures. So sometimes where maybe the writing itself would not have gotten the book challenged, but because of the pictures that it seems they get special attention that way. Some of the other books that have been challenged this year is All Boys Aren't Blue by George Johnson, The Bluest Eye by Toni Morrison. This book, again, comes up almost every year in the top 10. And this book was published in 1970. It's been around a long time and continues to get challenged. Flamer is another graphic novel, and it's by Mike Curato. Looking for Alaska by John Green. The Perks of Being a Wallflower by Stephen Chbosky. Lomboy, which is again another adult fiction by Jonathan Evison. Out of Darkness by Ashley Hope Perez. Me and Earl and the Dying Girl by Jesse Andrews. This Book is Gay by Juno Dawson. A Court of Mist and Fury by Sarah Maas, and Crank by Ellen Hopkins. So let's take a look at an example of a real challenge. This is a challenge that I had at the Mint Hill branch a couple of years ago. And this is the book is an ABC of Equality. And it's a board book. Looks really cute. Like, what would be the problem with this book, right? But a customer came to me and said, you know, they had a real problem with this book. If you read the book, it's got things like O is for oppression, S is for sexuality, T is for transgender. So the woman was very upset that this book was on the shelf. So I gave her our concern form, and she said she just picked it up off the display shelf. But her concerns were that the content regarding LGBTQIA paragraph and page details, sexual preference and orientation are completely inappropriate for children. And she said she did read the book and that a board book should not be so explicit in its content. And she said politically geared. And so the action she wanted was a removal of this book from the library system. So this is a good time to talk about that library code of ethics. Because when she handed the book to me and I kind of took a look at it and was listening to what she had to say, I may or may not, but as an example, I might have actually agreed with her. I'm looking at this board book and I might have thought to myself, yeah, that's weird. It's weird. I think this is too old for children. I agree. But the library code of ethics says my personal opinion does not belong in this conversation. And so I thanked her for expressing her concerns and told her we would take a look at it and that somebody would be getting back to her after it was analyzed. And something I learned, though, they're just saying is that board books are not necessarily are not anymore just for toddlers. All sorts of books can come into a board book. So it doesn't necessarily mean that it's for the preschool or the under 8-5 group. It could be anything that's in a board book. And we actually have some board books here at the public library that are in the adult section, but they're cataloged that way and they end up on the adult shelf. So a lot of things, again, customers can do all sorts of things to express their concern. They may talk about your display being inappropriate. Some customers' concerns will come in a very passive aggressive way. They might just start stealing the copies of a book. In fact, I believe it was this book, all the copies, we had like 4 copies up in our northern libraries, and they're just all lost. There's like 6 copies that are just lost. And so we knew that there was somebody who was helping us out by just removing the books and getting rid of them for us. There's sometimes people will keep checking the book out. And we had a customer who did that. She just told us, I don't think anybody should read this book, Melissa. And so I'm just going to keep checking it out so that no other child could accidentally stumble upon it. We've received books where the words are crossed out. I've had a picture book where somebody drew clothing on the with a black Sharpie. They colored in the pictures. We've had people will tell us you're not buying enough books that I like, or that your political view is too skewed too heavily. Concerns could come into your emails. You may find where concerns, come into the contact a branch emails, or just with phone calls. So all of these things, you need to be ready, and you need to be able to know how to deal with it when they come at you. So what are we going to do, Allison?
I know. So what are you going to do? So one of the most important things is to be prepared. So we know what to do if there's a fire. We know what to do if there's an emergency. We know what to do in a lot of situations. And so it's important for you to think through what you would do if you were faced with a concern or a challenge. I think that's interesting. Somebody put, even the adult books sometimes get their words blacked out. So it's not just kids, it's not just children's books. So the reality is that you could have somebody come in a situation similarly to how Anne described some of the interactions that she's had. And so you need to know what you're going to do in such a situation. So the first thing that's most important is you need to know your library's policies and procedures. And I know there's another session if you're in a position that you do the writing of the policies and procedures. It's important to make sure that those are tightly written, very explicit, and ready for such an occasion. I know there are lots of resources also on the ALA's website. I recently rewrote my collection development policy and request for reconsideration. I've been updating those in my own library as well. It's important that you understand your local community. So you might be able to anticipate what sort of topics you might get concerns or challenges about. And knowing your community and engaging in your community can sometimes build trust and head off these challenges because people trust you for the work that you do. You need to sort of come to terms with your own discomfort. So many of us are averse to challenges or conflict. We don't like engaging in that way, but it is something that you need to be able to do to engage with somebody who maybe isn't the most polite all the time or has different ideas than you do, but being able to navigate that is important in the work that we do. Confidence is important. We've mentioned the Bill of Rights and the Code of Ethics, and our collection development policy should be grounded in those foundational documents. So while nobody is asking you to provide a rationale for one particular book, it is important that you know that we are providing a well-rounded collection with all viewpoints for our community. If you need to, you can always engage your administration for support. If you're in a situation where you have a manager that you're working with or another administrator that can come and support you in this discussion or in this process. And again, we'll reiterate, it's important to stay informed so that you know the sort of what's going on in the landscape nationally and in your state, North Carolina. And getting involved and staying involved is helpful. I think reaching out to the rest of the folks who are here on this call and in the conference and making sure that you have good relationships and support systems, because I do think that it can feel lonely sometimes as you're going through this. But in the end of the day, it's important to remember that the way you deal with this is important as well. So your words matter, something that, you know, a lot of our families taught us growing up, and having a mutual respect is important. Hopefully all of your libraries have policies that are grounded in the Library Bill of Rights. It's not a bad idea to go back and reread those every so often. I actually teach a course at Elon about book banning historically, and I do have the students read our foundational library documents, and they're always surprised at the valuable and important work that we do. Their relationship with libraries, my students, is typically transactional, but learning about the things that we do is often transformative for their understanding of the role that we play. Of course, the code of ethics, which we've mentioned before, and all of these should be grounded in our library policies. Hopefully you have a statement of concern or a request for reconsideration. Different libraries call it something different, but knowing the process up front and having a process is very important so that you aren't really floundering. Some folks share that time is of the essence, and if you sort of take too much time or wait too long, the challenge can kind of get away from you. And then knowing if your library has guidelines for disruptive behavior or protests and library programs we've seen and talked about drag queen story times and people having strong opinions about it. We've seen in Wilmington and other places where those programs, family-centered, children-centered programs, have been protested in sometimes violent and scary ways. So knowing how to deal with those things to begin is important. If you are in a position where you can have make sure that the policies and procedures are updated, this is a really nice part of the Wake Tech library collection development policy. But I think it's nice also because this is language we can all use when we're talking to patrons or customers. So understanding that collection development is carried out by established selection policies. We don't just browse Barnes and Noble and pick books and resources that we think we would be interested in. We have a community, and we need to meet those needs of the community members. A reminder that the choice to use library materials is an individual matter. Nobody is forcing anybody to check out one particular book, and that nobody has the right to restrict or censor somebody else's reading. So in fact, I read one collection, pardon me, as a request for reconsideration, and the very last question was, do you think other people should tell you what you can and cannot read? So framing it in that way, I thought was such an interesting way to hopefully have the person take a moment and think about what they were doing and what they were asking the librarians to do, removing a resource. So if you're the person who is at the front desk when somebody has a concern or a question, you don't always have the ability to be the one that wrote the policy, but oftentimes you're the first line of who a patron or a customer would talk to. So always, just like you would with any other question, using your good customer service skills and being a welcoming, calming voice if things escalate, you may want to move to a more private place, but not necessarily completely out of earshot, because you may want to, as I mentioned earlier, be able to have a manager or an administrator step in if they need. Sometimes people just want to be listened to. So, listening and letting somebody speak their opinion or speak their experience or perspective is all they want to be heard. So listening is key, and understanding where they're coming from. Pardon me, they may not want to offer a written request. So they may not be interested in a formal challenge. They just want to share their opinion and their feedback. And of course, be empathetic and understanding. There are things in libraries that I don't actually want to read, and so, or that are upsetting to me. But that doesn't mean that I need them to be removed, or I want them to be removed. So understanding that there are topics that are upsetting to people is helpful. And of course, empathy is something we all need in the community. We are greatly desperate for that right now in our society. So empathy is not a bad thing, but keeping firm to the understanding about why we have the materials we do, and honoring the code of ethics is important as well. If they do want, obviously, a challenge form, hopefully you have one at the ready to offer them, and an understanding of the policies and procedures for carrying that out. So some things that you might say to a patron or a customer or a student or a faculty member that has a concern. Thank you for sharing your thoughts, and we'll pass this on to the materials management committee or group or head librarian, however you use that language in your library. We trust our students or patrons or customers to make the decisions about what they read and what they believe. I'm not going to make that decision for them. Could I help you find something that you would prefer? Something that maybe is on a different topic or a different viewpoint of that topic. I know that in the best case scenario, at least in education, I feel it's okay to engage with tricky topics and uncomfortable topics, but there are times when maybe somebody just needs to read something that is familiar to them and they would prefer to read. As a public or academic or school library, we need to offer a collection that will appeal to our diverse community. So reminding folks that their viewpoint isn't the only viewpoint in the community. And so, and also not everybody's motivation is the same. So I often read things that are different from the viewpoints that I hold, because it's important in learning and growing and understanding. Or of course, finally, I think this is really nice to have something at the ready. We adhere to a conscientious collection development policy. Would you like to see it so you can see what it is we are striving for and how we decide on the materials that we purchase and provide? Of course, you can thank them for sharing their concerns and what steps they would hope that you would take. And then if they do want paperwork to file a formal challenge, of course, hopefully you have it there for them. And then maybe you have them posted on your website, or maybe you have a copy at the circulation desk or somewhere easily accessible. You can show the patron or the customer the policies that you follow, and then, of course, we've mentioned before, if you feel uncomfortable handling it to reach out to a manager or an administrator as necessary.
Okay, so there's a lot of information to go over, and to being prepared, it's about the best thing. But we have just a slew of things that have been going on around us lately. We talked about that Catawba County parent who wanted the 25 books removed. Interesting thing with that is now she then ran for school board, and she's now on the board. So, and I think at this point, about 4 of the books of her 25 are being removed. But we also there was a teacher in Gilbert County who stood up against the book banning of a book that they wanted to remove. It was an optional book in an AP English class, but she stood up against them, and so we do have power. We just have to be ready to stand up and voice it. We talked about, I don't think I have that on there. Let's see. Here in Charlotte, Mecklenburg, CMS was asked, or they removed 2 books out of the high school, and the NCAC submitted a formal complaint and objected to their removal because they said that they didn't follow their own policy. And this was an interesting one too, because it was a Moms for Liberty parent, and I don't even know if she had students at the schools that were being pulled, but she learned about the books from watching another Moms for Liberty event where they pulled these books from someplace in Alaska. And so when she heard about the book, she's like, oh, let me check and see if we have those books. And so they did, and so they pulled them. But and down in Florida, there's a lot of things going on, but the students are starting to protest, and the governor had announced plans to ban colleges and universities from having programs concerning diversity, equity, inclusion, as well as critical race theory, and would bar funding for these kind of programs. And hundreds of students from various colleges came out to protest. So I thought that was really a great thing to see. The next slide. So besides being ready to handle it right there at your library, what else can you do? One, educate your people. Every year, American Library Association has banned Book Week. This year it's October 1st through 7th. You don't have to wait till then. Put up a book display right now. Put up a book display about censorship, the history of censorship, intellectual freedom. We don't always have to emphasize these books are being challenged. There's a lot more to this intellectual freedom discussion that you can make your displays about. And I encourage you to do so. Put up signs all over the place, all year long, and just keep the conversation going. Last year, the American Library Association launched Unite Against Book Bans. And this was in response to the Moms for Liberty and all these other very active groups that are calling for censorship. Unite Against Book Bans is a national, nonpartisan, grassroots advocacy campaign intended to empower readers everywhere to stand together and fight censorship. So I encourage you to go to their website, uniteagainstbookbans.org, and to sign the petition. And it also gives a lot of great tips on how to have conversations with people. This site is not just for librarians, it's for everybody. So tell your neighbors, tell your customers about it. They give you a lot of social media. I run one of their ads on our display board. And basically all it says is, don't allow other parents to make decisions for you, for your children. So things like that, being ready. And that just goes into the making your own decisions about what to read and allowing other people to do it. Go back one. So that, then the next thing is also to, Allison and I are both on the North Carolina Library Association's Intellectual Freedom Committee. We've created a website that has all these resources on it. A lot of things that we've talked about today are on our website. So please reference that. And we're also here to help you with anything that you need. Not that we have all the answers, but we're good librarians and we know how to find it. We could do our research. But hopefully we're immersed in this a lot. So hopefully we will have the answer for you at our fingertips and we'll be able to help you out. I've also created and I'm going to put this in the chat, a resource page that has a lot of, it has all those articles I said, it has links to everything we've talked about today is on that resource page. So it's just a PDF, but with lots of resources that you can access and be able to, or read some of these articles that we've made reference to. And so now, here's our contact information.